friends, let's get into the weeds on a full personal statement. What's working, what can be improved. I'll read it in its entirety and then we'll go from there. This is Malia's essay, who got accepted into multiple DO programs, was aiming for DO, and we crafted her messaging from personal statement to activities to secondaries and so on. Even with a letter of intent, right? We really kind of wanted to dial in her messaging and her kind of personal branding. And now she's on her way to becoming a physician, and so I'm so happy for her. If you want to learn how I work with students, make sure to schedule your call. The link is in the description, and you will be able to kind of chat with me, and we'll see if we're a good fit, to be very, very transparent. All right, let's get started. I will read it again, like I said, in its entirety, and we'll go from there. All right. When injecting the bruised skin on her stomach, she took a shallow breath to ask, "I'm dying, right?" My 48-year-old mother, whose sunken face I did not recognize, looked so vulnerable. Her swollen feet rested on a mountain of pillows at the end of the hospital bed that the palliative care nurse had just set up in her living room. All I could do was grasp her fists into my hand while watching her eyes sparkle with tears. 3 weeks later, on September 8th, 2020, I watched my mother take her final breath as her tumor, fluid-filled lungs gave up on her. For 6 years, from her initial diagnosis of metastatic stage 3 breast cancer to her passing, I was my mother's translator and sole caregiver. The peaks and valleys of our journey were the hardest years of my life, while they also sparked my pursuit of a career in medicine. My mom filled life with endless love and joy, and now in her absence, she has given me purpose. In hopes of carrying forth this sense of purpose, I set out to work as a special needs camp facilitator at a center for adults with neurodevelopmental conditions. I wanted to make sure that Miss G, who is both blind and autistic, felt included at the camp, so I organized a musical activity for her to lead. While clapping along with a grin on her face, Miss G's body started convulsing. Following the emergency protocols, I began timing her seizure and cleared the area. The next day, Miss G was back at the center and asking for a hug upon hearing my voice. Her mother informed me that after they got home from the hospital, Miss G could not stop talking about how much fun she had at the quote-unquote concert. Through this experience, I learned how important community support and inclusion is for an individual's holistic well-being and aspire to ensure my patients have this collective support. After graduating, I worked as a therapy coordinator for a patient support program right up until my mother's health was deemed palliative. Patients diagnosed with chronic illnesses used our services, but they felt most cared for when feeling the benefits of collective support. One time I received a call from a woman in distress. She was pregnant and could not afford to have her allergy injections delayed. Quickly, I contacted the pharmacy and they informed me that her medications were sent to another clinic accidentally. Making numerous calls and sending emails, I managed to coordinate our program's home care nurse to fit the patient into her evening schedule. The conversations I had with patients taught me the value of building relationships with patients beyond their symptoms and ailments in order to understand the social determinants of health that may prevent them from accessing consistent medication. As a future physician, I will strive to personalize my care so that it addresses the individualistic needs of the whole person through an identity-centered care approach that encompasses all aspects of who they are. To me, integrating all aspects of someone's identity into their healthcare means that patients should access their care within the familiarity of their cultural experience. While volunteering as a communications liaison at the ICU, I guided a young man to his mother's hospital room when I recognized a familiar language coming from another room. The language was Urdu, my mother tongue. I peeked in and saw the anguish on every wrinkle on the woman's forehead. In fragments of English and Urdu, she asked the nurse to help her find her phone. In the ICU of a French-speaking hospital in downtown Montreal, the nurse looked dazed while trying to understand what the woman was saying. I caught the nurse leaving the room and asked if I could help translate for her. I introduced myself to the woman in Urdu, and I watched her frown soften as she let out a sigh of relief. Being a child of immigrants brought up in the province of Quebec, I understand her experience all too well. Nurturing trust, we discussed how her cancer prognosis affected her entire family. Her candid reflections helped me confront my fears regarding my mother's cancer prognosis. Soon after, I sought psychological help to better cope with being her caregiver, which is when I introduced weekly yoga sessions in my life. Medically, however, I hoped I eased the woman's anxieties about receiving care as an immigrant. In the future, I commit to prioritizing care that creates culturally safe healthcare spaces for patients and their families to receive quality care. In March 2020, when the oncologist told me that my mother's prognosis was palliative, I noticed an immediate shift in the standard of quality of care. Hospice care lured me into the principle of treating the whole person. From my mother's palliative care physician, I learned that osteopathic medicine balances science, care, and the sanctity of the human condition. Initially, the uncertainties of my mother's cancer affected my mental health, which in turn affected my grades during my first undergraduate degree. However, I gained firsthand clinical knowledge and managed to pave the way for emotional resiliency, all while being on the sidelines of circumstances that were out of my control. I am ready to step off the sidelines and be the doctor my mother knew I could become. Overall, the statement is emotionally compelling, deeply personal, right? It communicates the candidate's motivation for pursuing osteopathic medicine, and it's super powerful. So why it works? The candidate is really kind of dialing into their motivation for medicine, right? And they go into a myriad of experiences, from inclusive practices with Miss G to culturally competent kind of translation with the woman at the hospital, right? And so she is in different contexts, emphasizing this holistic and compassionate sense of kind of care. The intro is, not everyone has this life-altering experience, and that's totally fine. I do also share personal statements that are more quiet to start off with, but this is kind of right off the gate so compelling and emotionally vulnerable that it's beautiful, and painstakingly so, right? So the kind of bruised skin on her mom's body, the question, I'm dying, right? So like this sense of kind of, pain in every line through imagery, and then giving us a date 3 weeks later on September 8th, 2020, I watched my mom take her final breath, right? So this entire kind of section, the entire intro, really brings in her personal hardships, her driving force to medicine, and then the kind of towards the end where she talks about how the peaks and valleys of her journey were the hardest years of my life. And they also sparked this kind of pursuit of medicine, right? The last few lines really kind of come into that kind of emotional register, which was really important. Number two, one of the other things that I think work really well in this personal statement is the culturally kind of compassionate, culturally aware care, right? So helping that woman in the ICU with translation, it really shows the candidate's understanding of the importance of the culturally safe healthcare spaces, right? And the commitment to providing that care. It's not about just having this similarity with a patient, a cultural kind of bridge. It's about building that bridge and kind of being at the level of cultural familiarity and comfort that the patient needs. And so really kind of knowing that and knowing how important that is, I think came out really nicely, and it really aligns with the osteopathic philosophy. So I think this kind of significance of community support, inclusion, understanding social determinants of health, right, are all these concepts of osteopathic medicine that the student really dials in nicely. I think also the personal statement does really well a sense of personal growth and resilience. So I don't know if you noticed, the student really wanted to kind of talk a little bit about potential a red flag about kind of her grades dipping. And so we really brought it in at the end in almost just a couple of sentences, right? And so I really kind of wanted to make sure that it did not detract from the emotional center, that this personal statement was really kind of emotion forward, which was authentic to the student, right? And every student that I work with, we really strive to keep the writing, the text, the reflections very authentic to their emotional, professional, academic register, so that it sounds like them, their most polished, elevated version, but that it sounds like them, that they reflect in that way, because they're the ones that are going to sit with the admissions committee in the interviews, right? I really thought that bringing in the red flag, just those couple lines about kind of the grades dipping a little bit and when it was, and bringing it back to kind of a sense of strength and resilience and growth was a strong way to go. Another kind of, moment, and I just mentioned it, but another moment, or to kind of reiterate, is that inclusive opportunity with Miss G, right? This sense of having this kind of balance between individual action, so the student's individual action, and the kind of collective support that the student is actively building as well. So whether it's the quote unquote concert with Miss G, making her feel included and special, but also kind of like being part of that collective support for Miss G and others, and as well as kind of like, supporting the nurse in the ICU while translating. Yes, doing that individual impact while translating for the patient, but also supporting and being part of that broader community. So I think that the balance between individual and collective is really nicely done in this personal statement. Are you writing now or staring at the blank page and are not really sure kind of how to start your AACOMAS personal statement? Help or comment below any questions you have, and I'm happy to share my Calendly link so that we could jump on a call and see if we're a good fit to work together, or I'm happy to kind of go back and forth with you in the comments and help you kind of get unstuck so that you can start writing your best, most authentic, most compelling proclamation of self, right? You've dedicated so many years to being ready for this moment, and so you want to really make sure that you are as strong or declaring your readiness as kind of most convincingly and compellingly as possible. Another kind of aspect that the student is really working very nicely is the commitment and genuine interest in kind of like their approach to osteopathic medicine, right? So the approach of osteopathic medicine. The conclusion about the oncologist telling that her mom was, palliative. It says, hospice care lured me into the principle of treating the whole person. From my mother's palliative care physician, I learned that osteopathic medicine balances science, care, and the sanctity of the human condition. I love that line. It is a big line, right? It's a big, bold, broad kind of statement, but she can do it because she's anchored so many really beautifully captured descriptive moments where we have sensorial language, we have her in action, we see her connecting with mom, with the ICU patient, with Miss G. We have all of these images so that we can then have these big, bold statements. So that's the kind of balance, right, between the showing and telling. You'll hear so many people say, show, don't tell, show, don't tell. You can have these like big telling phrases if you set up your breadcrumbs the right way. I hope this was helpful. I love to share personal statements in its entirety because you get a sense of kind of like beginning, middle, and end. You get a sense of like how you kind of land the plane, how you do reflections and transitions. This personal statement has beautiful transitions where it picks up phrases from one paragraph to the next. But again, this is basically a final draft. I'm not sure if we tweaked a couple lines here and there, a couple phrases, but I mean, 99%, this is a final draft. It didn't start this way, right? It started with brainstorming. It started with pooling different kind of stories together, see what fits, see what doesn't, then kicking whatever doesn't fit in the activities or secondaries. It really it's messy and it's active, but it requires that intellectual kind of work before you get to something so polished. So don't get discouraged by reading something like this and thinking, oh, I'll never get there, or, I don't have those kinds of stories. Quiet personal statements are equally powerful. And so I share it just to kind of get a sense of like where it could go, right? Aspirational. But if you really want to know how to kind of get there and what the secret sauce is and how to work together, definitely get on my calendar, fill out our application, and see if we're a good fit, and we can go from there. I hope this was helpful. Like I said, give us a like, share with your pre-med friends, and I will see you soon. Thanks so much. Bye.